If I had all of this starting out, it would have cut years off of my learning curve when I was getting into commercial real estate. In the next half hour, I'm gonna walk you through a presentation I did for my CRE Accelerator Mastermind on how to analyze your first commercial property so that you understand if it's a good deal or not, so that you can go and buy your first property this year. Let's get to it. Okay, so when you're getting into your first deal, you got to define your investment goals. You have to know which way that you are actually going in order for you to get there. That means you need to define how much cash flow you actually want out of your assets. Almost every single one of you that I've had a conversation with, as y'all were onboarding into the program, told me that. But write it down, right? I wrote it down for you. I need you to write it down as well, because when you do that, you're like 10 times more likely to actually achieve those goals. Do you want it to be hands-off? That's a pretty important piece of criteria to set if you're gonna go out and start buying passive investments. If not, you might get yourself into a situation where that's not one of the criteria that you think about as you're going through this process, which means you might get something that's a little more involved than anybody wants. Does it need to be multi-tenant? Is it single tenant? Does it matter, right? There are pros and cons to everything, right? I mean, I call it a gift and a tax. Right? Multi-tenant is not always better than single tenant. Single tenant is not always better than multi-tenant. There's different reasons to buy different types of assets. So if you have those questions as you're going through that, that's what we're here for. All right, let's talk about investment focus. We'll dive into asset type. So let's talk about office, because I don't think anybody in here has actually told me that they want to buy any office right now, which is not really surprising. But office is actually doing fine. The United States is one of the biggest countries in the world in terms of like geographic size. Like if you go from Washington State all the way to Florida, it's like going from England to Turkey, right? So far away. So for what's going on in office in San Francisco, that doesn't apply in Nashville. Look at your local market. It's so local specific, right? Check your local vacancy rates. That'll give you a really good idea as to how specific assets are performing. It goes across everything. So the pros with office, longer term leases with often more stable tenants, right? Go get a law firm, 5-10 years. Get a therapy practice, right? You do an accounting firm. These businesses typically sign leases and they'll stay there for a long time. There's no reason for them to move. It's not like they need to move into a different demographic in order to capture somebody's visibility or attention. High visibility in prestigious locations can attract quality tenants. You don't need it, right? Like the downtown core is great if you really want to go get the next WeWork, but it's not going to help you in capturing that local accounting firm. They do not care. They just want something that's convenient for them. Cons of office, pretty obvious there, right? High vacancy risk during economic downturns. A lot of these bigger companies, they're out raising capital, right? Or they're dealing with bigger vendors for their companies. If those guys go under, probably a pretty good chance that the office tenant's not gonna be able to pay you rent anymore. It can be expensive to maintain. Office tenants, especially when you get into like Class A, they are prissy. Oh my gosh, they're divas, man. Dealing with small businesses though, they don't care. They're like, is it clean? Is it cool? Is it nice? Are you guys bothering me? Because if so, I'm mad. But as long as you leave me alone, we're pretty good. And then there could be a market oversupply in some areas because of the remote work trends. But again, it's hyper location specific. In East Nashville, we don't have enough office space. When we drive up and down here, pay attention to how small the buildings are. It's because most of the parcels are very small, which means that they're, for the most part, either locally owned, or they're actually owned by the business that is in it, which makes it very difficult for somebody to come in here and assemble multiple parcels to build a high-rise big enough to deliver enough office space in this area for it to have too much office, which is a good thing, right? We actually want to create that problem because it just helps with oversupply. So getting into retail, higher foot traffic leads to premium rents and prime locations. And I want to reiterate that the more urban an area is, the less parking you actually have, the harder it is for cars to fly through, the higher rents will be. Everybody thinks about it with a car-centric focus. How quickly can I get in and out with my car? You're not spending money there. The people that live in the area that want to ride their bikes to the local bar, that want to walk down the street to a local boutique or a restaurant or whatever, they're the ones that spend the money. The nice thing about retail, we talk about triple net leases all the time. I know that's one thing that y'all get really excited about, getting into commercial real estate, getting out of residential, getting out of multifamily, is the triple net lease structure. You're basically gonna be getting the same gross rent on a monthly basis, right? The biggest difference with a triple net lease is that the tenant is responsible for the increases and property taxes, building insurance, common area maintenance, right? So 20 bucks a foot full service and 15 bucks a foot triple net are the same thing. If the common area maintenance, property taxes, building insurance is 5 bucks a foot net. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's not like, oh, we can go from 20 full service to 20 net now, because tenants are still gonna look at it on the same price per month basis. Cons to retail, they can be vulnerable to changes in consumer habits. We've seen that over the past 10 years, right? With people starting to buy off of Amazon, I mean, how different are stores today than they were 10 years ago, right? Like look at Best Buy alone. You go into a Best Buy now, half of it is actually a distribution facility. But now a lot of these retailers have created these completely different experiences, right? So now it's more of an experience going into the showroom. They're giving you a reason to be there. One thing that I'll urge you all to do as you're looking at all of your commercial properties, what kind of experience could you create for your tenants? Whether that's industrial, office, doesn't matter. Give them a reason to want to go there every day. Smaller retail spaces can have higher turnover just because you're typically dealing with startup businesses that, they may or may not have their funding. They may or may not even know who their customers are. And then of course you can get market saturated in some areas. Now that is happening less and less nowadays because not much retail is actually being built. A lot of the retail development that we have seen over the last decade is actually ground floor in a mixed use building, which is great. It controls retail growth. It allows for a much cooler environment, walkable neighborhoods. And we no longer have Target anchored shopping centers going everywhere that have a sea of parking. On the industrial side of things, high demand from logistics and e-commerce. I cannot stress that enough. I don't know how it continues to go up, but it doesn't seem to be slowing down at all. Everybody's going e-commerce now. And then because people are doing that, the system is getting broken in different ways that other companies are starting to come in and solve. I can have all of my widgets shipped in from China, stored at this other person's place, and then I sell it through my online warehouse or on my online shop, and then they fulfill it and ship it out for me. I love industrial because they're typically lower management costs and maintenance costs. For larger industrial tenants, you've got longer term leases with stable corporate tenants. I don't necessarily care about that. That is a pro, but we just kind of talked about why I actually don't like single tenant, bigger corporate deals. The thing is with industrial, the bigger you go, the more specialized you actually become with the property, right? Because if you think about what kind of user is gonna need 50 to 75,000 square feet of industrial, they're gonna have to highly customize it out to themselves, right? Which means that the next guy coming in is now gonna highly customize 50 to 75,000 square feet for themselves, which means that you get to pay for that. So that's why the smaller you go, the more flexibility you have with any type of business that you can sign a lease with. The bigger you go, you're getting way, way, way more specialized. So you just better really know those tenants and their needs. Industrial, some of the cons, man, I mean, they're limited to specific locations, right? Most cities do not want more industrial. They just don't want it at all. Light manufacturing is a different thing, and distribution is a different thing, but it still really depends because most of these cities don't actually get a high tax base out of industrial facilities. They create jobs, but they're not high paying taxes. What makes a good deal? We're gonna dive into the factors that I like to look at. Probably one of the biggest unknowns for commercial real estate is what actually makes a property a good investment? How do I actually understand that how can I be confident that this is gonna be a good deal? And this is really some of the criteria that I go through to understand that. Location and accessibility. The closer you are to major thoroughfares where people can get in and out of easily, the better of a location it's gonna be. I know that sounds a little rudimentary, but it's true. People don't necessarily think about accessibility when it comes to why an area is so good. Take a look at your city and figure out what corridor has been neglected that might have better access. It's gonna be more affordable. One of the reasons I started looking at Dickerson Pike is because there's only so many arteries coming in and out of Nashville. And they were all already developed. There were 2 or 3 that weren't, and out of those 3, Dickerson Pike by far had the best accessibility. Traffic counts, right? You don't necessarily need to get out there and actually count all the vehicles going by. But I mean, you can get that from your local, Department of Transportation. Public transportation, go look for the bus stops. Go look for accessibility points to get onto transit, right? If you hear rumors, there was a lot of real estate that traded in East Nashville back in 2016 and 2018 when there were rumors that there was a train that was going to go up and down Gallatin Pike. People started overpaying for real estate because If a train did go up and down Gallatin, like they were proposing, it would have totally changed everything. Ingress and egress. Evaluate how easily customers, employees, vendors, whatever, can get in and out of the property. We are creatures of habit. We want it to be super easy. If I have to cross 4 lanes of traffic to get a Starbucks coffee, and I know that 2 miles up ahead on the right-hand side of the road is a Dunkin' Donuts, I'm going to the Dunkin' Donuts. It's just that much easier. So you can tell here, these buildings at some point are going to be worth significantly more than these buildings. They're right next to each other, but guess what? This guy right here, this tiny little guy, if he goes up this high, he now has signage potential for all of this traffic going by. So people actually start to look at these buildings in a different way. That's why these companies they'll buy strategic or lease strategic buildings so they can put a giant sign. Companies will also do this in downtown cores. You think any retail spot in Times Square makes any money? Absolutely not. In fact, a lot of them lose multiple 6 figures a year being in those locations. But they do that because it is a giant billboard for tens of thousands of people every hour. Visibility is very important too, right? Properties that can be seen from high traffic roads will attract higher quality, better quality, more tenants faster because they can be seen, right? Again, it's all about marketing. Yes, they're paying rent. They're gonna have to pay rent anywhere. I might as well pay rent in a location where I can also make sure that tenants can see me. When you get into these commercial districts, you'll typically have commercial right up on the road where all the signage can be seen, and then immediately behind them, you probably got office or multifamily because they don't need to be seen from the major thoroughfares. Those are destinations. If I'm a law firm, there's no need for me to pay retail rates for space when I could go right here and pay 30% less. I mean, make sure that buildings, other buildings, trees, whatever it is, are not blocking the path. I had a nonprofit reach out to us about doing a carnival at one of our properties. I told them, yes, you can do it. We just gave them the space, right? Because it's a fundraiser. I told them they could set up on the grassy lot on the side. They set up in the parking lot in front of one of my tenants. And when I called them, she was like, well, I didn't think that you literally meant the grassy lot on the side. I was like, what did you think I meant by park on the grassy lot on the side? So they had to go over there and make the tenant happy because he has in his lease that his visibility from that space to the road cannot be blocked, right? They do that on purpose. A lot of these bigger retail groups will have that for that exact reason. They don't want a carnival being set up in front of their space so that nobody can see that that location is there, right? Makes sense, but it's just things that you probably haven't thought about if you haven't done that before. That's ugly as hell, but damn does that stand out. Right? I mean, come on, it's right there on a corner. It's green and yellow. It wraps the corner so every single person at this 4-way stop right here can see that market. You know they're paying a premium for that visibility. Andy's Supermarket is not a destination for me, right? It's a convenience. So I might be driving home. I might be driving to hang out with friends. Oh, I need to stop in. I need to get a water, get a pack of cigarettes, whatever. These are all like kind of impulse buys, right? So you want to attract people, give them the convenience, get them to stop in. Zoning and land use. So make sure the property is zoned for your intended use. I have seen investors not check this, making the assumption that the property was zoned for what's currently in it. Makes sense, right? If there's a, auto repair shop operating out of this business today, they can operate out of there tomorrow. Not necessarily. Some people don't pull permits. They don't get use and occupancy permits when they're going through this process. So there is a chance that it goes unnoticed, it goes unchecked. Nobody will ever realize it. But all it takes is one upset neighbor to throw you under the bus. Now you're in a lot of trouble. So go in, double check the zoning, make sure that whatever's in there is actually permitted. Especially if you're buying something that has a lease in place because you're buying the income that that lease produces. And if that's not technically a legal lease, then you're not really buying anything of value. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but look at the plan for the city and see if there is potential here to rezone it. It's not always my first option, right? Like I don't want to go in and be like, I want to rezone this property, but I always check to see what this could be, right? In the future, because I'm planning for my exit. But I did a deal, actually we talked about it the other night. It was a 2-story motel that we were gonna upgrade to a boutique hotel, but I went through and worked with an architect to figure out what could be done there by right today, and it was 38 stories. So I was looking at that, I was like, okay, well, obviously even in 10 years, nobody's gonna build 38 stories in this location, but I'll be able to pitch that to a developer in the future of, hey, you can build whatever the hell you want here, right? So it makes my job on the exit that much easier, because either you can pay a 6, 7, 8% cap rate for this hotel, or let's just treat it like a land deal, right? I have the options to do that. And then look for land use restrictions, right? That could include easements, environmental issues. Easements don't typically show up on tax records, right? They will show up in a survey. That's why I always recommend getting an ALTA survey. An ALTA survey is where the surveyor will come out, he will compare it to what is actually on the title. You will start to learn some very interesting things like that. But you want to make sure that there's no easements preventing you from doing anything. For example, I had a piece of property. We didn't know about this until we had the ALTA survey done. We'd already put it under contract because I'm not going to pay for a survey until I've got that. The seller didn't know this either. There was a sewer easement running right across the middle. Well, guess what? I can't build on top of a sewer easement. So then that totally changed the plans for what we were going to build on this lot. I went from having one building to 2 buildings separated with a parking lot in between so that I could accommodate that easement. It will totally change how you design these projects. Demographics, I mean, study the pop size, income levels, growth trends. Depending on what type of investing you want to do, this could matter more or it could matter less. I couldn't tell you the last time I even thought about demographics in East Nashville, because I live here. My office is here, most of my properties are here. I spend the overwhelming majority of my time in this area. I see the demographics every day. When I went to Chattanooga, oh man, I was having to study all the data, then go out, sit in restaurants, eat lunch, and just look at people, you know. Come on, I know some of y'all do that already. Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels weird, but like you gotta get out there and do that, right? Like you want to see, like, are they young families? Is it a bunch of young bachelorette parties? Is it a bunch of college kids? Is it grandparents? You know what I mean? Like you kind of want to understand who these demographics are. Target market alignment, obviously make sure that the demographic that is surrounding this property matches what your target tenants are going to be providing. A really good example of this is why I didn't buy anything in Huntsville. Huntsville is a very strong market, unbelievably strong. Probably one of the top 10 best markets to really be investing in the country. For what I do, terrible, right? I want to do really cool, hip, interesting things. The problem is Huntsville is further south. It's got more of a deep south demographic, even though it's only an hour and a half away from Nashville. So a lot of your population in Huntsville, while they're highly educated and they're making a lot of money, they're getting married at 22 and having kids, which is like, my friends are like 40 and they have not gotten, they can't maintain serious relationships, all right? So like, very different demographic. And then of course, competition. Right? Go look at what else is out there, right? I mean, I had this conversation with Marcus when we were talking about flex space in the area. Everything that was around his flex space was garbage, right? It was just old, run down. They didn't really spend a lot of money on the exterior. They didn't make it nice. He knew that if he just put the brick on the facade, did the little cedar overhangs, did the additional lighting in the parking lot, you know, all of these little things just start to really compound and add up, and it makes it light years ahead of any of the competition. These are all the Starbucks that was in this little area. There's a couple of different things to glean from that. One is, oh, maybe there's a gap right here at this intersection, right? Maybe there's a gap on this side of the interstate. And I say maybe because I don't know. There could be a reason why Starbucks was like, absolutely not, we're not going here, we're going here. There could be a reason why they said, actually, we need to be on the north side of 40, right? There's reasons. But you could also say, hey, Starbucks has already spent all the money to determine that these are really good spots to have coffee shops. I'm going to go open a Dunkin' Donuts right next to every single one of these. So there's ways to get strategic with it. Analyze the traffic flow, but go look at peak hours, right? I mean, chances are good if it's a part of town where you're like, I would never want to drive over there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's probably a pretty good place to go buy real estate. And guess what? If you're sitting in traffic, what are you doing? You're probably looking around you. And you might just stop in and shop, or you might stop in and get a drink, or you might go ahead and grab dinner. There's all sorts of things that you might do to just avoid traffic, spending money. For retail and mixed use properties, it is a big asset for office, things like that. Industrial is like, we don't want anybody near this property at all, right? There should be no reason you should be walking over by an industrial property. This is 12 South. And so you can see right now, this is 4 lanes. So 2 lanes each way. And they're actually getting rid of an entire lane. They're putting in these curbs, right, with planters. and then they're making a bike path. So as a cyclist, that is infinitely more safe than having just a cycling path with paint on the asphalt. It just makes it so much more pleasant. And guess what? The people that would use this to drive through it are gonna go somewhere else now, which means that this is now a much more pleasant area for everybody that lives there and wants to spend money there. As far as the site conditions go, does the site's size and shape accommodate the intended use? There's a lot of lots out there that are shaped irregularly. We want to fit rectangular buildings on triangle lots. How does that work? Right? So make sure that when you're looking at lots, either you're getting a really good deal on something that's irregular, or you can do something really cool with it. So we had a triangular shaped lot that one of my clients built, and they called it the boomerang because the lot was shaped like a giant triangle. And so they literally built a triangle building on it. And it's really cool. It's not the most efficient use of design. It's not the most efficient use of space, right? You kind of get in it and you're like, who's gonna be in that corner over there? But it's really cool to look at. It's like, wow, what a great way to actually build this out. Parking, unfortunately today, parking, I mean, you guys know I'm against cars, but parking is still a very important aspect of commercial real estate. So even though like with the wash, which you'll see, there's no parking spaces there. I have 3 spots that are 15 minutes max and 1 handicap, and that's it. We did still make sure you can park on the streets over here, you can park on the street over there, there's a parking lot across the street, there's another one across the other street. There's plenty of available parking if somebody needs it, so that we weren't completely abandoning cars. Topography and drainage. If you've never gotten into a site before and you've never looked at how water flows on that site, it will amaze you sometimes at how poorly designed some of these were, if they were already done, and just how horrific that can be to move dirt if you have to fix it. And then is there any room to expand or add additional structures? I always like to have a civil engineer come in if we're buying an existing building to see how strong that building is. For example, one of the buildings that we have at Peerless is 3 stories. But you look at this thing and you're like, man, you know, it was built in like clearly the 50s. Back then, you know, it was like engineering was, let's just make sure it can hold whatever we want to put on top of this thing. It was crazy. They didn't actually get like really scientific to say, if you drop a feather on top of this more, it's not gonna do anything. They just overbuilt all of it. And so we looked at it, we had an engineer who was like, yeah, you could build another 3 or 4 stories on top of this. It was great, I don't have to change anything. It's already there. That's a way for you to make your dirt cost significantly cheaper because now you're spreading it out over 9 stories instead of 2, right? So this is what a topo map looks like. This up here is the peak, right? Whenever you see these lines, the closer together that they are, the steeper it is. The further apart they are, like here, see how far apart these lines are? The more even it is. So just important to kind of know that as you're going through. You want to build here. You don't want to do anything right here, right? Because if you're cutting into a hillside, you got to flatten that out. You're going to have to move a lot of dirt. Then you're going to have to figure out where that dirt's going to go. Then you're going to have to figure out if that's going to cause any stormwater issues. And if you're in Nashville, sorry. Stormwater is a nightmare. Also, check on the environmental and utilities. Even if you're going to pay cash for something, just do a phase 1 environmental report on it. Banks require you to do it, right? So like there are massive benefits to having a bank involved because they will at least make sure that you're not gonna make mistakes because they wanna protect their 80% or 75 or 50%, whatever it is. So they're gonna make you get a phase 1 environmental. They're gonna make you get an Alta survey. There's things like that that they're gonna require you to do. If you're paying cash, there's nobody there telling you, hey, by the way, go get a phase 1 environmental report. And if you buy a property in cash and don't do a phase 1 environmental report, and then you go to get a loan, the bank is gonna say, hey, do the environmental. If you find out that there's contamination on the site, you are now personally liable for cleaning up all of that. It's a lot of risk to jump into something without checking out environmental. By the way, for those of y'all that don't know how the environmental remediation works, you'll have an engineer go out there and do core samples. They will test the soil, right? They'll get like a core that goes all the way down, however many feet that they need to. They'll do that in multiple locations on the site. And if anything comes back above the permitted limit, you have to start digging. And you have to dig out all of that soil until it no longer tests above the limit, which could be a long time because groundwater starts to get into this stuff and then it starts to take it deeper and deeper and deeper and it starts to spread it out further and further. And that's how you get into these 6-figure, 7-figure environmental remediation checks. Energy efficiency is always nice, right? Whenever I buy a building, the first thing that I do is I go in and I change out the thermostats to make sure that tenants can't turn it below 67. They can't turn it above 75. Nobody ever needs to do anything above those. But that'll save you a ton of money because it'll keep it from just running and running and running and running. Changing out all the lights to LED, it's very easy. There's actually some tax credits and grants that you can get. So highly recommend checking out some of those. You can also search for utilities, search for utility capacities within your districts. This is in Nashville, obviously. So it's got different grades over here. You can see like less than a 10-inch diameter for the water. That's not going to have a lot of capacity, right? So I probably, if I see that the road that I want to build a 200-unit apartment complex on has less than a 10-inch water line, I'm probably not going to be able to build 200 apartment units and have any water pressure whatsoever. But you can do this to check capacity on water, sewer, stormwater, whatever it is. So pay attention to trends in future development. One easy way to do this is to just read the news, read the local news, right? The Nashville Business Journal is phenomenal with all of this because they're typically talking from an entrepreneurial perspective. The Nashville Post is really good because they take more of a real estate approach. So I can follow what's going on within these different neighborhoods. So I can see, okay, there's been a lot of announcements over the past couple of years in this neighborhood. There's a lot of cranes going on in this neighborhood. What's going on? Right, just start to ask those questions. What's happening over here? What's causing people to go over this way? What could this become eventually? Back in 2014, I told my grandfather we should start buying houses over in the Nations. And the Nations back then was nothing. He grew up in the Nations over off of Kentucky Avenue, and it was a ghetto back then. And so he was like, absolutely not. We are not buying anything in the Nations. But that was when my generation was starting to get out of college. They were buying homes. That was the only place that we could afford. And so they were buying these houses and fixing them up and making them nice. And it was so close to the urban core. I was like, this is going to be a great spot. And he was like, no, nobody wants to buy a house that looks over next to a warehouse and, this close to downtown. Well, we could have bought houses back then for like $150,000 a lot for like 2 houses. And now they're like $700,000 homes, $800,000 homes. So don't look at it what it is today. Look at it for what it could be and why it could be that. Research plan developments, right? You can actually look this up in your local, if you want to go attend council meetings or just look it up in your zoning codes. Like in Nashville, I can actually search for SPs, which is a specific plan, and go in, because they used to call them PUDs, like a planned unit development. Right, that was big in the 80s. You can go in and see what people are getting approved, because that's typically when somebody says there's no zoning code that fits me whatsoever. We have to get something specifically for this site. And sometimes they're bigger projects, right? Because nobody's going to go through that effort for 1 house to 2 houses, right? This is typically we want to build 30 stories or we want to do high density, something like that. Because those take a while to go through, which means you can kind of play the off-market opportunity. Maybe buy something over near there if you're expecting it to get approved, kind of ride that wave. And then nuisances. People hate living next to noisy highways, noisy trains, industrial plants, whatever. This is the Nashville Next plan. Look for all of these different areas, right? So there's a tier 1 in orange, that's where they see the higher density stuff going on, right? So maybe the downtown core is too much for me. I'm gonna go out this way and see what I can do in this area. Right, so if you follow the plan, there's all sorts of different areas that you might be able to kind of tap into and kind of get ahead of the curve just because you're the one paying attention to what's going on there. Key takeaways, start with the location first, right? Dive into the accessibility, the visibility, and the traffic count. Make sure that you understand the zoning, just dive into that. Again, it's one of those things that people don't check, and it can be so important. Know your market, get to know the demographics of it. That's why I call myself product type agnostic. I'll invest in any type of commercial real estate as long as it's in East Nashville, Madison, or Chattanooga, right? I just know those neighborhoods better than most other people, so I know exactly what to deliver. And then of course, check out everything physically, right? Dive into parking, lot layout, utilities, any environmental issues that could pop up, because you want to make sure that you don't have to pay for those after the fact.
All right, now that you understand a high-level overview of how to actually go through the process of analyzing these deals, there are still other steps that you need to understand so that you get the full picture of how to do these deals on your own. Check out this video here where I even give you a download of my deal analysis toolkit, and I'll see you there.